I'm here with this beautiful
Beautiful is a generous
gentleman,
word. Generous word.
Steve Litscher,
Yes.
who runs sound for,
Badflower.
well, today.
Today it's Badflower, but
So-
normally Atreyu, Story of the Year, Mizio, Dance Gavin Dance, and Badflower.
That's it? Not like...
I have like one open week in the year. I could maybe fill it in with one more band.
Well, thanks for having me, man. I would love to jump into this, but I know we talked about a little bit your background, but I'd love to kind of, for people who haven't seen this, I would love to maybe dive in a little bit again, if you
Sure.
don't mind. What got the sparkle in your eye to run sound, or the sparkle in your ear? Ear?
Buying a CD player in the 1980s. I'm a really old guy. And when I was in high school, I saved up a bunch of money for mowing lawns, and I bought my first CD player. And prior to that, I'd been listening to cassette tapes, and I got a CD player, and I was just awed by how great it sounded. So I went to my high school band teacher, and I asked him, why does a CD sound so much better than a cassette? And he explained, digital versus analog, and went into sort of the recording process and how they had made advances in like the number of tracks they could capture. And that really got me curious. And so we worked together to get a soundboard for our school. And I sort of did self-study for a couple of years in exchange for going through this like individual program. I got asked to run sound for like the jazz band and the choir and the school plays. And it was terrible.
Do you remember the soundboard?
Yeah, it was a 16-channel PV powered mixer. And it was like, this wide, and it had 400-watt amplifiers in the back, and it weighed 8 billion pounds. And I would haul it home, on the weekends and try to figure stuff out.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and a lot of feedback, we only had like 4 microphones, I think, no EQs other than what was built into the channel strip. And I learned from there. And then I went to college, and my first day at college in the dorm room, I got a call from a friend who was older than me, who had a band in the city I was going to college in. And he goes, I heard from our band teacher that you know how to do sound. And I said, well, yeah, I sort of know. And he goes, great, we have a show tonight. We need a sound guy. Can you come do it? And so ironically, let me get that. They had a first show that night, and my very first board mixing like a real band was an Allen and Heath GL 2400. And so, I'd only been on the PV, and all of a sudden I had all these extra controls and channels and subgroups and everything, and I didn't know what to do with it. But I figured it out, and then I did it as a hobby for years, and I didn't start touring until I was 48. So, yeah, I lived a whole number of lives prior to getting into sound, like professionally.
Yeah. What did you do beforehand?
I was an auto mechanic at a dealership for a couple of years, like 6 or 7 years. I was an electrician for a couple of years, and then I went into project management, computer programming, things like that. I did that for most of my adult life, and then in 2019, I got an opportunity to tour, and I quit my job and went touring.
Just straight?
Yeah. Quit my job, made like $75 a week or something. I can't remember in my first couple of tours.
What inspired you to quit? Because I know there's a lot of people that message me on this of how do I make the transition, or how do I know when it's right, or how do I get involved with it? I mean, that's pretty not common to be so late in your career, and then also like give up that for this. So what was that decision that made you want to?
I wanted to do it my whole life. I couldn't figure out how to tour. I started a production company hoping that would lead to touring. I did it as a side job from my normal day-to-day job. So for 5 years, I worked every single weekend in bars and festivals and clubs around Wisconsin, which is where I'm from, if you couldn't tell from my accent. It's not Bostonian. So I spent 5 years of every single weekend working gigs, doing bar bands and whatever I could get my hands on. And it never led to touring. And I got really frustrated in early 2019. It was like February or March of 2019. And I just said, you know what? I'm done. I give up. I'm 48 years old. I can't tour anymore. Or I'm not ever going to get a chance to tour. I can't do this bar gig anymore. Yeah. So I sold all my gear except for like an X32 rack for that little house concert venue that I was talking to prior to us recording. And I sold it all and shut it down. And then one day, about a month later, a friend called in a panic, having problems with an in-ear system. It happened to be an X32 rack. And I said, I just happen to have one sitting in front of me right now. And so I walked them through, got their ears fixed, and they were opening up for Godsmack on an arena tour, and they didn't have a sound guy. So I went to one of their early shows in Milwaukee at the Fiserv Forum, which is where the Milwaukee Bucks play, and I saw this band open up, and they didn't have a sound guy. And so after the show, I went back and talked to the band, and they asked me what I thought of the show. And I said, should I be honest or should I be nice? And thankfully, honesty is the best policy.
Yeah, I guess so.
I said, you guys need a sound guy. And they said, why? And I said, because it sounded really terrible. And they said, do you know a sound guy? And I sort of raised my hand. And from there, it just took off.
How pivotal do you think it was, those bar and clubs, and how much of that practically applies to what you're doing now?
Yeah. It's a great learning foundation because I learned what was really important to have in a PA. You know, like in a bar, I couldn't have snare in the PA, but I learned to delay my downstage microphones ever so slightly so that whatever they were picking up was still in phase with the snare. So my snare tone didn't get real wonky. Like that was a trick I learned pretty early on. And, you know, I didn't need overhead mics. So it's new having overhead mics for me, like on festival and arenas and amphitheaters and things like that. But I love them. But when you're mixing bars and clubs like that, like the small, I'm talking like 300, 400 cap clubs and bars, a lot of it's Sophie's choice. You know, like what you have to make really hard decisions about what's going to go into the PA, and you know, because too much is too much. It's overwhelming.
Yeah.
So I've learned pretty quickly less was more in the bar world, and in some aspects I do that today. The most important thing for me is getting the vocal on top of the mix, and it was back then. And so I learned tricks on how to make space and things, especially when you had the guitar players at the bar level that, you know, as they consumed more and more beverages throughout the night, they kept turning up their guitars in the search of that ever elusive tone, you know, that's so important. So, so then, you know, you're just fighting all night and making adjustments, and I learned never to really get complacent with things. So I actively mix my shows. I wish I was a guy that could like set it and forget it and have automation, but it just doesn't work up here. So I have to be hands-on all show. So yeah.
Man, I've done a lot of clubs and bars and stuff, and I feel like those moments are so pivotal because you learn a lot of fundamental things there through trial and error, and things of like, you know, you can't have the best of everything. You kind of got to make stuff work. So how do you make it work? And process of elimination, like what happens when it goes down? You don't have somebody else that can run do it. You got to figure it out now.
Yep.
And how do you be proactive instead of reactive? So when they're coming in, like how do you set up things for success so that when it goes wrong, because it will always go wrong, something will go wrong. Yeah. How do you figure that? Yeah. How do you figure that out? And I try to tell a lot of these guys, see, like those are really important moments. Yeah. Your career.
It's our stage manager is getting ready for vinyl signing for VIP stuff. So yeah.
But it's so pivotal for your career to be able to learn those moments in that almost pressure cooker environment, because like your vocal mic's not working, and now people are going to be looking at you and pissed off at you and very vocal, and you're right there with them. So
for almost all of my bar career, I didn't have a console. I did it all on iPads. Because there was never room in these little tiny clubs for me to park even a 1500, you know, which didn't exist at the time. I had a lot of M32s, and then when the D-Live came out, I switched over and I got 3500s for more like the festival stuff, but I couldn't haul those into a bar, so I was on iPads a lot, just running Director from the mix rack. But it's a different kind of pressure, because there's pressure in the big shows, you know, like you've got a lot more sets of ears listening to everything you're doing. Sure. You've got a lot more phones capturing everything that you're doing and putting it online. But the people usually don't come up to you directly and say, I can't hear my son's guitar. What are you going to do about it? You know, and like when you're in a bar and mom and dad are standing right next to you, you know, arms crossed, glaring at you, so you figure out how to put those fires out pretty quickly. And I think that helped me like be pretty calm in whatever situations I've got going on today. Like, it's the best job in the world. You know, I pinch myself every single day, and I can't believe I get to do this. And so when something isn't perfect, would I like it to be perfect? Absolutely. But nobody's going to die. You know, it's not going to be the end of the world. and we'll get through it, and we'll make it better the next day. So, you know, if we're having, like the other night, we had a problem with a pickup in a guitar, and the guitar was picking up the kick drum for some reason. So every time the kick drum hit the guitar would make this like staticky grain, something went wrong in the pickup, and you just deal with it, and it is what it is, and you make the most of the show and make little adjustments. And we swapped the guitar out after we figured out what was causing the noise, but you know, for 3 or 4 songs, I may have been pulling my hair out, I may not have been.
Yeah.
But yeah, it doesn't get to you.
I don't know if you were like me, like when I first started doing clubs, there's a lot of like EQ hacking I did. It was more of a like reactive than proactive again.
Yeah.
And it wasn't so much of a tuning the room. And then once you get to more accessibility to bigger boards, plugins, more EQing. There's this phase that I went through that like I added a ton of stuff.
Yeah.
Did a bunch of EQing, then it's like, okay, how do I step that back now from all of that? So what was did you go through that kind of that same thing, or how do you recommend to people who are doing the Barthel Club and the whole idea of less is more and not just add everything because you can add it for it?
Yeah, it's a great question. I have definitely changed how I EQ and what I put into systems on the bigger stages because, you know, when you're at like Welcome to Rockville in Daytona and you've got 18 boxes of K1 per side, you can hear every change you're making and you can do anything you want to because they're deployed, you know, so that you're not fighting feedback and you're not killing the people that are sitting right in front of the speakers. So it gives you a lot more freedom, I think, to do what you want to do. But at that bar and club level, so getting back on track here, you know, at the bar club level, if you try to put everything into the PA that you want to, you're probably going to have feedback. You're probably going to have a lot of stuff fighting over each other, and you're not going to get the things that you're looking for. So again, it goes back to my approach of like vocal has to be first. So I always focused on vocal at the bar and club level. And guitars, they always had cabinets, so I didn't worry about guitars. And so then I would make sure I had enough kick in the PA, and then any tracks or keys that they had. But you know, those were the things that I really focused on in most environments. And now I would like a lot less drums right now.
What do you think is one of the biggest mistakes people coming from that environment to actually touring or to doing larger PA? What do you think is the biggest mistake you see?
For me, it was not being able to control my low end. When I got into my first like big room, it was like, I think, I'm going to forget the name of the venue, but it was in Detroit, and I was on tour with Stitched Up Heart, the first band I toured with. We were supporting Steel Panther, and the room had like 4 layers of balconies. It might have been the Fillmore, I can't remember. And a big dome in the middle of the room, and my kick drum is probably still ringing in there today. I just could not control it. And I was on an M32, you know, so I didn't have all of the tools that I have today where I can, you know,
ringing today.
where I can throw a dyne 8 on it, you know, and like clamp it down.
Yeah.
But not controlling my low end, like I wasn't high passing enough stuff, and I wasn't EQing. I was EQing for what I thought sounded good individually, not as a collective mix, you know? And then during the show, I would be like, wow, it's really muddy compared to Nick Rucker, who mixes Steel Panther and is just a monster, a genius mixer. And so it was really tough to mix before him every night because I'd be tearing down and listening to his mix and just couldn't figure out what he was doing. And he was just had such control over his low end. And so for me, that was the big thing.
What was the key to that for you?
Getting back on D-Live and having like you can see my kick channel right now. It's so unconventional, but I have the 4-band parametric, my 12-band parametric, and then I also have my dyne 8 doing stuff on it, and I have a compressor, which I use the LA2A. People think that that's probably a little unusual, but I just like the clarity that it adds to it. So just having the technology and the tools, and if I didn't have those technology and tools, I would gate the heck out of my kick so that it was like super, just letting the fundamental through and then clamp it.
Yeah.
Especially in a bigger room, a shorter gate for me is like one of the things I'll do if I don't have the luxury of having something like this. Because I was in I think we were talking earlier, I just got back from a tour in the UK, Europe, and China, and we did that on an M32. And I had to go back to my roots and be like, oh golly, I've got minimal tools now compared to what I was used to. And so, yeah, brought back all those skills pretty quickly.
So you've used a lot of consoles, everything. I'm sure you used big boys, smaller ones, analog.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's people who watch that. You're using a 1500, which is a nice, compact, small frame.
Yep.
Mixing console, and it's one of my favorites. Do you feel like it's important to have the huge console, the massive Digico, or the massive fill in the blank $250,000 console? Do you feel like this is that important to have all the fader counts and all the extra bells and whistles? At least for you.
It's a great question. There's a number of ways I could answer it. I'm so comfortable on the 1500. My muscle memory is ingrained in this. I've been on this now for 5 years. And during the pandemic, I just sat and mixed on it every day, all day, just trying to make sure I could learn everything about it and know it inside and out. I have mixed on like the S7000 with Dance Gavin Dance. We had 36 fader count board, and it is a nice luxury to have because there's always a number of things that you're making minimal, minor adjustments to, and just being able to reach over and do that real quick without having to flip layers is great. Would I like an S6L or a Quantum or something like that? Absolutely. Like the tool sets that they have and the integration with things like Waves are so good. But I don't think it's necessary at all. Like this console, this one has been around the world again with me this year. I just noticed I flew over 90,000 miles this year already, and this little guy's gone with me for most of those miles. And so just having that capability, being able to throw it in a lightweight case and go to the airport is amazing. I couldn't do that with a Quantum or HD96 or an S6L, So I have rented D-Lives overseas, and then no matter how much you prep for it, things like the firmware on your Waves card is just ever so slightly different. And then you spend, time getting that corrected, and then you come back and now your show file is slightly different. So when you're back on your old, reliable, faithful console, something is different. So I just I love the 1500. I'm not trying to make this a commercial for it, but I do love the 1500 a lot. So a really long way around the question that you asked to get to a short answer is I don't really think it's that critical for the type of shows I do. Yeah. If I was mixing Tool or somebody just massive, I would absolutely want more faders. But for the bands that I'm working with, I get pretty good results from it.
We've seen this big. You don't use a bunch of outboard gear, and this is the first time in my lifetime I've seen go from analog to digital, back to analog, and the pendulum has kind of swung back and forth with it, and it's really cool to see. There's also like this hybrid model coming from it. What's your thoughts on outboard? I notice you don't use it. You're kind of a high-speed, low-drag. Is that personal preference, or is that you just like to keep it small form factor with it?
I like the small form factor because like on this one, we're doing a number of festivals, and for me, not being the headliner at a festival show, or with us, we're not, in the top 2 slots. I don't always have the luxury of a sound check, and I don't have the luxury of being able to carve out my space at front of house, where in a festival environment, it's usually pretty limited.
Yeah.
So for me, it's more being just minimalistic, like you said, high speed, low drag. I do have my Wave server. I know when we talked at Story of the Year at the Masquerade, where we both got frostbite.
It was so cold. If you go back to that video, you'll see us.
Yeah.
So cold.
I don't know what to do with my hands.
It's so cold.
It is cold.
It's so cold here.
I thought this was hot Atlanta.
I don't know. I just moved here, and I'm just figuring it out.
Our unmentionables were nice and chilly.
Yes.
But at that one, I was having some issues with Waves, and I was sort of dogging on it. I've sorted out those issues. Huge shout out to Brian Campbell from Sum 41. He worked with me and got that sorted out pretty quickly. But I still only use one plugin in Waves. I use F6 on my left-right, just so I have a little extra control over the PA. If it's a tricky room, and there's just one nagging frequency, I can just squash it pretty easily and keep tabs on it. So yeah, I would love to have outboard analog gear. I'm envious of the guys that get to have it, but I'm not in that situation on this tour. Yeah. With Dance Gavin Dance, I had it, and I loved it. I made the use of it, but for most of the bands I work with, we just don't have the opportunity to carry it.
What is one piece of advice you'd give to audio engineers that would immediately make their lives easier?
Stay in school. Oh man, less is more. I think less is more. Like that's sort of the theme that we started with, and I really feel like that's the case. You know, it's cool, whether it's gear, whether it's what's in your mix, whether it's, you know, tricks that you're doing. I just think right now my mood has been trying to be as simple as possible, and from my setup to my mix to my daily routine, like just try to keep things simple.
There's a new section I'm adding, and you're going to be the first one we're doing it with.
Oh no.
There's a new section I'm starting.
Yeah.
Maybe What's the Gram? I don't know what it's going to be called.
Yeah.
I'm going to show you pictures from your Instagram.
Oh no.
I'm going to show you it here. It's going to be on the screen, but I want you to explain what's going on in that picture. Okay.
Okay. All right.
All right. First one.
Yeah, that looks like me going to Europe for the first time. So that is my luggage cart. Has my 1500 on the bottom, my mix rack in the middle, some drum mics and some cables, and then that is not luggage in my suitcase, but that is actually more equipment, and I fit everything that I wore for that tour in that backpack next to it. Oh, golly. So this is a joke. One of the bands I work with has a fetish for ice, and you could never have enough ice on the bus. And so the venue didn't get us enough ice, so we had to stop the bus at a gas station, and I had to buy ice on the spot to top off the cooler for them.
What is going on there?
Well, that is during the pandemic. I was driving from Madison, Wisconsin out to Los Angeles, California to do a one-off show at a horse ranch with Stitched Up Heart during the pandemic. They invited like 20 of their like biggest, dearest fans, and I stopped at, I think that was like a huge rooster or a bird of some sort in Iowa. Rupert Neve headphone preamp. Amazing, amazing, amazing headphone preamp. I was using that during the pandemic as a cleaner source so that I could get a little bit more accurate feel for my mixes, and now I use it as a backup in case like our drummer's ears go out. It sits at our drum riser, and we can just plug into it if his wireless goes out.
What's going on there?
That is years ago. So I have a heart condition called atrial fibrillation, and I had AFib, an incident. So I was about to get my heart zapped back into normal rhythm. So I've had a procedure since then, and it has been corrected. So knock on wood.
Last one.
Oh yeah, so you wouldn't know it looking at me right now, but I used to really be into triathlons and marathons and bicycling and stuff. And so I live in Madison, Wisconsin, and I bought a fat bike for the winter. So it's one of the like 4-inch wide tire bikes, and I was just out riding around in the winter and took a picture in front of the Capitol. So yeah.
What is the last song you mixed that made you emotional in a good way?
Oh, it happens every single night. It's Promise Me from Badflower. It's a song about this couple that are deeply in love, and they promise each other that they're going to be together, and neither of them is going to pass away, and one of them does. And so it makes me think of my own relationship, and it gets me every single night. Like I do wear my heart on my sleeve from time to time. I'm very passionate about my work, and I want my crew to always be treated well and my band to have the best experience. And you know, when you're in some venues, I'm not looking at that aren't always the greatest. It's hard for me to sort of keep that under wraps. But yeah, that song gets me, and the Jester from these guys gets me every single time. Jester gives me goosebumps, and Promise Me will put a tear in my eye pretty often. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I know we're short
out
on time.
Yeah.
So if people want to follow you and follow your career, where can they follow you at?
The Geeky Steve on Instagram is probably the best place. I usually try to post stories every day, put in behind the scenes looks and things like that. Take pictures of odds things that come back to haunt me later on. But yeah, probably Instagram, The Geeky Steve.
Okay.
Yeah, so yeah, that's it.
Or come to a Badflowers or Story of the Year or Atreyu or Dance Gavin Dance
Yeah.
show near you.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.